Where is this place? Why does every light feel like it is watching her? The question slides from Lyra like a breath held too long as she stands at the edge of the terrace under the corporate skyline that glittered like an accusation. The Gala for Hawke Industries is supposed to be a celebration of mergers and art, but to Lyra, the marble smells of lemon polish and cigars feels like a courtroom, and the silk of her gown presses cold against the place where a secret sits like a stone. "Help me, someone," she whispers, and the whisper becomes a shiver as her heel catches on a seam and the world tilts. The blast barrier is slick with the evening mist from the river below, and in a single, surreal second, she is falling. The silver of the fountain erupts the way a breath becomes a cry. Water hits the fabric and makes it heavy, like a sentence. She feels hands grab at her arms. A man with a jaw like a proclamation pulls her back, but when the grip tightens, she hears a voice that runs through the crowd. "Princess Lyra, step aside." The name lands like a bell, and the faces part into a ring of cell phones and champagne flutes tilting like witnesses. She tastes copper on her tongue from the small cut on her lip, and the perfume in the air is power and old money and something metallic that reminds her of keys. The object clutched at her chest by the wet silk is a small object wrapped in thread and gold, a locket everyone in the room knows as the Pembroke locket, the emblem of a lineage that has been used and auctioned and claimed and bought. The CEO, Richard Hawke, moves forward, calm as a storm, and his hand rests on the locket with a kind of proprietorial reverence. "That belongs to Hawke Enterprises," he says, and there is a hush like a countdown. The crowd inhales the drama like oxygen. The promise is in the way a camera light flickers toward her face. Fewer than 30 seconds have passed, and the gala has become a tribunal. The narrator whispers to you, "Stay until the end, because what happens to Princess Lyra will change who has the right to love and who has the right to rule." The marble is cold, the water is cold, the light is sharp, and your chest might ache with the smell of wet silk and scandal. The next morning, the city wakes to a headline that folds like a complaint. The social feeds flood with videos. The footage of Lyra slipping and the Hawke hand flat on the locket loops endlessly. Someone posts a clip with the caption, "Princess in peril" or "Princess scam." Who did this? Who is Lyra really? Her name is everywhere, and so are questions that taste of contempt. At an upscale brunch table, Elena, a fashion influencer, picks up a fork
and says, "How could she wear that to a corporate event? Does she think she is audience royalty?" Juno, the society columnist, murmurs. "It is a brazen display. She needs protection, or she needs to explain herself." The conversations ripple outward like gossip on water. The Pembrokes of Pembroke Hall issue a statement that is coldly phrased and thinly veiled with outrage. Lord Pembroke appears on a live stream, stern and declarative, and insists that family relics are not accessories and that Lyra must return the locket. The scent of roasted coffee and buttered toast fills kitchens as people take sides. And in the middle of it all, Lyra stands on a balcony looking at the city, as if it were a chessboard. She traces a ring at her neck as though counting measures of betrayal. A messenger from Hawke Industries appears with polished shoes and an envelope of legal jargon. "We require the locket for corporate verification," he says, and the paper whispers the word contractual and control. The social escalates, and Lyra hears whispers about a fixer, a rumor of a pregnancy, a suggestion that the CEO uses marriages as leverage. Her friend Amir calls from a taxi. "You have to be careful. They will try to claim you are unstable." The sound of traffic below is the pulse of a city that will either forgive or break her. The sensory details pile up like accusations. The taste of unsweetened tea, the squeak of slippers on hardwood, the tick of a clock that will not stop. They send in Dr. Anya Patel, a conservator and appraiser, to examine the Pembroke locket. The examination room smells of solvent and old paper, and the lighting is exacting and white like truth. The technical description of the authentication process is precise. The conservator documents the piece with high-resolution photography, performs X-ray fluorescence to register elemental composition, and runs microsampling, then compares hallmark patterns with archival records. The report outlines chain of custody procedures and catalog verification and concludes with a tamper analysis that requires signature and witnessed deposition. The description is clinical and detailed and occupies a page of paper that will either vindicate or condemn. But it is also only 300 characters of procedure and an armory of evidence that does not speak of motives. The voice of the appraiser is calm. "This object has been altered," she says, and the calm becomes thunder. The lab results land like a gavel, and the narrative takes a turn toward law and ledger. At a private luncheon, the board meets and the air tastes of lemon and steel. The CEO Richard Hawke sits like a conductor. He speaks with the measured cadence of someone who has had power explained to him since childhood. "We cannot allow family relics to be used to mislead our stakeholders," he says. The board members nod and the cameras wait outside. The scene is tight with tension, and every sentence is a brick. The board proposes to remove Lyra from the foundation. She chairs a committee that steers a large grant, and now they question her judgment. They stage a hearing, the way a theater director stages shame. The sensory field is precise: the rustle of papers, the hiss of whispers, the leather chair creaking, the metallic click of a pen as votes are counted. The accusation is public humiliation wrapped in corporate policy and punctuated by a lawyer who folds his hands and says, "We recommended a temporary suspension pending further investigation." Lyra's throat is dry. She meets the eyes of Sophia, a longtime ally, and sees sympathy and calculation in equal measure. The room smells like stale breath and hot coffee, and the sense of a life narrowing into a legal definition. The protagonist hears words that feel like small knives: divorce, even not of marriage, then of status and agency. She refuses to be defined by the minutes of a board meeting. She decides to counterattack in the only language the company seems to understand: publicity and proof. Her childhood in exile becomes the lantern that lights her path. She grew up in a small wing of a palace that was more memoir than museum. The daughter of a displaced minor royal who learned to read financial statements as a way to survive. She learned languages the way other children learned lullabies. She remembers the sound of river oars at dawn, the smell of wood stoves, and the taste of stale bread. Her education was irregular and filled with the bruises of being seen and not believed. She taught herself to find loopholes in contracts, to patch legality with kindness. She has scars she hides with jewelry and confidence, but beneath the practiced smile is a woman who has rehearsed leaving and returning more times than she can count. She was given the title and never the treasury. She married a promise and watched it dissolve. She has always carried a locket of her own, a plain iron thing her mother left her with a note: "Remember where you are from." The backstory is a braided thread of survival and tenderness that explains why she moves against Hawke not as revenge but as reclamation. This part of her life is a slow and measured narrative, the way candlelight makes every object look both beautiful and fragile. Richard Hawke grew up in a tower of glass and rules. He learned commerce before he learned to fish. His father taught him to command with reason and to respond to disrespect with neutral cruelty. He married mergers the way other men married women. He cultivated public grief and private control as if both were skillful strategies. He sealed deals with handshakes and with the occasionally anonymous donation that bought newspapers. He believes in institutions the way some people believe in fate. He is not without charm. He is cultivated, kind, and often generous in small, performative ways. He is meticulous about lineage and legacy because the Hawke name has always been insurance for him. Richard suffers from the industry of scarcity, the idea that if he does not claim an asset, someone else will. He has secrets too small to make a confession and large enough to crush an opponent.
He has a collection of letters from competitors showing a pattern of acquisitions and an appetite for narrative control that borders on obsession. He is the antagonist because he defines success as control, and Lyra stands in the way of the story he intends to write. The public humiliation culminates at a charity ball where Lyra is meant to speak. The room smells of roses and cognac, and the chandelier hums like an orchestra tuning. There are 8 direct exchanges in the main scene, each line a nail. The MC starts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome Princess Lyra." Lyra steps forward, and the breath of the crowd rests on her. She hears Richard from the side. Perhaps this is not the time. She smiles, a smile that is a blade, and answers, "Perhaps it is the only time." He says, "You are reckless." She says, "I am awake." He says, "You are dangerous." She says, "I am alive." The back and forth sharpens the room like a blade. The sensory palette is rich, the rustle of silk, the metallic clink of a glass, a painterly glare in the spotlight, the sticky sweetness of dessert, the chill of air conditioning against skin, and a soft hum of a record player in the corner. The audience divides, and Elena clutches at her bracelet and whispers to Juno, "She is courting scandal," while Amir watches with clenched fingers in his coat pocket. The exchange climaxes when Richard stands and declares that Lyra is in violation of a non-disclosure agreement. A folded paper is held high like an indictment. Lyra laughs, a short, soft sound that is close to a cry, and says, "You cannot chain a person with a clause." The room reacts like an animal startled. The scene ends with applause that sounds like a verdict, and Lyra walking away with the locket heavy against her breast. Lyra assembles allies. She calls upon Maya, an old museum curator who remembers the Pembroke locket from a gallery cataloging expedition, Tomas, a journalist who can bend a headline toward truth, Sophia, a legal counsel who believes in redemption, and Elena, who knows how to move cameras. Maya touches every surface of the locket, the way a midwife touches a newborn, and says, "This is not the original." Tomas types out a threat that will go viral. Sophia draws up emergency filings and says, "We will request chain of custody records and a declaratory judgment." Elena calls in contacts at 3 influential channels and arranges to release video that frames Lyra not as a victim, but as a claimant. The sensory moments are precise, the smell of old paper in the archive, the click of a typewriter, the hiss of a radio static, the chalk dust on a curator's sleeve, the warm weight of a legal pad. The team moves like a compact orchestra, all knowing their parts. There is a legal technical description of the signature analysis and chain of custody that takes the form of a process note. For the expert witness, the handwriting and ink composition were examined by hyperspectral imaging. The signature on the certificate was compared to a database of authenticated samples, and a forensically validated ink aging protocol was applied. The lab logged the evidence with time-stamped photographs and witness initials. The conclusion was written in measured language and said that the provenance documentation had been reconstructed in a way inconsistent with archival records. This procedural recitation is 286 characters long, and it matters because it changes the ledger. The key event is an appraisal held in a whitewashed room attached to a museum, where Lyra and her allies stage a reveal. The room smells of varnish and late afternoon light, each chair a witness. There are 27 exchanges of argument and rebuttal, a dense sequence that stretches like a rope. The appraiser produces a microphotograph. The CEO produces a notarized certificate. The curator holds up fluorescence images. The journalist projects a timeline of ownership. The crowd inclines towards spectacle. The sensory field here is rich with light, with the metallic click of a projector, the grit of dust motes in sunlight, the soft tremor of a handheld camera, the dry taste of a throat, and the steady thump of fear. The locket opens under examination, and what is revealed is a smaller hollow with an inner symbol like a seed. The appraiser says, "This inner mechanism fits a pattern of resets used in the 17th century to denote stewardship, not ownership." The word stewardship changes the room like wind shifting a curtain. The narrative turns from property to promise.
The audience gasps like a winded chorus. There are 3 moments of peak tension, each pulled out and stretched to examine the way choices feel from within. Moment 1 is the night of the fall in the fountain. It is 560 characters of concentrated panic and witness. The world narrows to water and the crush of silk, and the way every camera finds you, while only one hand seems to offer help. And that hand belongs to a man whose touch already has a claim. The wet silk tastes of salt, the crowd's gasps are like glass breaking, and Lyra feels the locket thud against her sternum like a second heart. Moment 2 is the board vote that threatens to remove her from the foundation. It is 578 characters of legal derision and betrayal. The room smells of stale coffee, and the clicking of pens has the metronome of a trial. The lawyer reads clauses like an executioner reads names. The vote is counted in the way a heartbeat skips, and Lyra
watches allies lower their eyes. Moment 3 is the appraisal reveal. The mechanism inside the locket is exposed. It is 594 characters of revelation. The photographer's flash is a strobe that keeps memory from settling. The curator's whisper that it signifies stewardship, not ownership, spins the narrative. And the CEO's controlled face cracks for a second and is beautiful and terrible and true. The mystical thread arrives like a rumor that becomes a history. An old archivist at Pembroke Hall produces a faded diary entry that speaks of 2 young lovers, a steward and a displaced princess, who sealed a promise with a token, a little hollowed locket meant to be passed from guardian to ward. The text is watery with age, and the scent of damp leather and beeswax is palpable. The story is short and aching, and ties Lyra to a past life of stewardship rather than entitlement. She reads the entry aloud in an attic smelling of dust and oak, and the language of the diary moves through her like a tide, in 3 paragraphs, connecting her not to a claim of title, but to a duty to protect. The revelation reframes the corporate battle as a misunderstanding of custody. The mystical note is subtle. It does not crown her with fate, rather it gives her a lineage of choice. She feels the weight of responsibility more than privilege, and the audience feels it too, because stories of lives past awaken a tenderness that is nearly religious in its effect. The confrontation final happens in an atrium of glass at midday. The CEO stands like a lighthouse in a storm, and Lyra approaches with her allies in a tight formation. There are 14 verbal exchanges, each rapid, each cutting into the other. He says, "You will sign away your claim." She says, "I will not be owned." He says, "You are naive." She says, "You are cruel." He says, "You are reckless." She says, "You are lonely." He says, "You would rather burn bridges." She says, "I would rather build a bridge to the people." The sensory detail is intense. The sunlight cuts through the glass and paints the floor with squares of light. The smell of lemon cleaner is strong. The metallic echo of the elevators opens like a throat, and the low hum of corporate air conditioning is the backdrop to a moral orchestra. The lawyers circle like predators. The press rings the atrium. The moment becomes a choice. Lyra chooses to relinquish formal titles and instead signs a document that transfers stewardship to a community trust she helps found. It is not surrender. It is a redefinition. The CEO bangs a fist metaphorically, not physically, and his expression is unreadable for a heartbeat. Then he smiles, a small, private smile that does not reach his eyes. He says, "You may go." The words are an unwrapping and a wound at once. The epilogue is set in 3 temporal beats. 1 month. Later, the city has not forgotten, but it is kinder. The first epilogue segment details how Lyra steps into morning markets and finds a rhythm. She attends a small exhibition on community-led heritage, and the room smells of fresh paint and local bread. She is asked to speak, and instead, she listens and records names for a new trust. She reconnects with Maya and Tomas and invites Sophia to be legal counsel. The social feeds begin to carry stories not of scandals, but of small projects of restoration. The character of Elena sets up a vlog that centers Lyra's work and it draws donations. The language here is reflective and concrete. The piece describes the way the trust accepts the locket as a symbolic deposit used for education and community loans rather than for private display. It is 1,002 characters of change, small steps, and public gestures that build credibility and intimacy. 3 months later, the ripples become a current. The second epilogue segment shows a preliminary report by an independent panel clearing Lyra of wrongdoing and recommending new policies for corporate acquisition of heritage items. The city council discusses a bill inspired by the case, and there is a sense of legal repair. The trust that Lyra fosters gives microgrants to craftspeople and funds a panel on ethical stewardship. The press that once mocked now interviews the curator, Maya, and the journalist, Tomas, and the pieces read like human interest stories that simultaneously expose systemic flaws and celebrate small victories. The sensory notes include the clatter of tools in workshops, the bright smell of varnish, and the tangible heft of books donated to a community library. There are new names in the narrative, people like Amir, who organizes a volunteer registry, and Sophia, who teaches a legal clinic. The description is 1,108 characters and shows momentum. 6 months after the fall, the third segment of the epilogue shows a different city. Lyra walks down streets that once echoed with whispers and now echo with greetings. She has traded palace receptions for workshops on heritage repair, and she attends a community auction where objects are bid for by neighborhood co-ops. Her presence changes how people speak about legacy. It is not a return to royalty, but a reimagining. The Pembroke locket rests in a display case at the Community Trust, being used as a teaching tool and a symbol of stewardship, not possession. The CEO has stepped back from public interventions into cultural property and is under scrutiny for earlier acquisitions. The narrative ends not with a neat victory, but with continued work and relationships like new scaffolding for a building under repair. The language is sensory and exacting, the smell of rain on pavement, the taste of a shared loaf, the squeak of repaired chairs, and a chorus of names who now stand with Lyra. These segments total roughly 3,200 characters and bind the story into a long arc. There are procedural notes. The records show the emergency injunction filed by Lyra's counsel, the request for expedited appraisal, and the motion to compel production of chain of custody documents. The filing included affidavits, witness logs, and an expert declaration. The note is 312 characters and precise. This procedural scaffolding is what turns a scandal into a solvable case. It makes the narrative plausible and credible. The final scene is intimate. It takes place on a quiet rooftop garden where Lyra sits with a cup of tea. She hears a city that has been softened by accountability. She thinks of the steward and the princess in the diary, and she understands that agency is a series of decisions that require community to sustain. The narrator recaps. The princess lost public titles and gained a voice. She kept the locket as a symbol and converted its meaning from claim to custody. The resolution is practical and emotionally resonant. The community that once watched now holds, and the CEO learns that some things cannot be owned, only tended. If you felt your chest tighten at any point, we want to hear from you. Pause and tell us in one sentence, starting with, "I would have done this," or "I would have exposed this." What would you have done in that gala when everyone was watching? Your voice matters to our community and helps shape future stories. Now subscribe if you like detailed accounts of truth, power, and the way people reclaim what was taken from them. We publish stories that mix drama with technical detail and human repair every week. Join us for the next episode about an heirloom, a hidden will, and a museum that will not release its files. She walks away from the corporate atrium not as a woman defeated, but as a woman who chose a different vocabulary for influence. She looks back once and the glass glitters like an old promise, and then she turns toward a life made of small repair and stubborn hope. The last line echoes like a benediction. The thing she kept was not merely a locket. It was a reason to insist on dignity for others and a way to teach that ownership is a duty more than a right.